You know, way before the 2016 presidential election completely shook things up, there was this other, really passionate grassroots movement already trying to draft its own ultimate outsider for the White House. And that man was the former governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura. And this, right here, this was basically their online headquarters. Now, yeah, it looks like a pretty simple blog, but don't let that fool you. This thing was the engine for a small but super dedicated group of people who truly believed Jesse Ventura was the only one who could save the country. So, who was this guy really, and what did his supporters actually believe? Let's dig into the story of this kind of forgotten political movement. We're going to look at the man himself, what he stood for, and the, well, let's just say surprising worldview that got his biggest fans so fired up. Okay, so to really get this movement, you've got to understand the man first. And believe me, Jesse Ventura's life has been, well, anything but conventional. I mean, just look at this career path. He was a Navy SEAL during the Vietnam War. Then he was a bodyguard for the Rolling Stones. After that, of course, his huge run as the pro wrestler Jesse the Body Ventura. And then something totally wild happened. In 1998, he pulls off this shocking upset and actually wins the governorship of Minnesota as an independent. This was no career politician, folks. This was the definition of a true outsider. Okay, so that's the larger-than-life persona. But what did he actually stand for? What were his policies? Well, luckily, there's a pretty comprehensive database of his positions out there, so we can get a really clear picture of his political thinking. And really, at its core, you can boil Ventura's whole thing down to one phrase: fiscally conservative and socially liberal. It's a combo you just don't see very often, and it definitely doesn't fit neatly into either the Republican or the Democratic box. And you can really see that socially liberal, almost libertarian side of him here. He was for civil unions, he was a fierce critic of the Patriot Act, and get this, he famously was the only governor to refuse to declare a national day of prayer, basically saying, hey, that's not the government's job. His views on other big social issues were just as interesting, and they weren't simple. Take abortion. He was personally against it, but he thought it should stay legal because of privacy. What about drugs? His take was simple. Treat marijuana like we treat alcohol and tobacco. And guns? He was for the right to carry, but he believed he should have to pass a safety exam first. Now, on the money side of things, he was all about smaller government and giving power back to the people. He thought if there was ever a budget surplus, it should go right back to the taxpayers, not get spent by politicians. He also wanted to go back to this kind of old-school, low-risk banking. And he even threw out this pretty radical idea, getting rid of the income tax altogether and replacing it with a national sales tax. All right, so we've got the man, and we've got his platform. Now let's turn to the really passionate movement that actually tried to get him to run for president back in 2016. And this movement had a, let's call it a raw contempt for the two-party system. This quote from their blog just says it all. I mean, they didn't just see Democrats and Republicans as opponents. They saw them as two sides of the same corrupt coin, literally comparing them to rival street gangs. And you gotta understand, this was not just a bunch of people complaining online. No, this blog had a very real, very practical goal. They wanted to organize enough supporters to actually get Jesse Ventura's name on the presidential ballot in as many states as they possibly could. They even laid it out for people in 4 simple steps. Basically, go to the blog, find your state, jump into the forums, and start talking about how to get Jesse on the ballot. They had a forum for every single state, pushing people to connect and try to figure out those super complicated ballot access rules. This was a real, genuine, grassroots effort. Okay, and this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. Because when you put Ventura's official, kind of wonky policy ideas for reform side by side with the worldview of his biggest supporters, you start to see 2 very different ideas about what was actually wrong with America. So first, let's look at Ventura's actual plan. It's all very concrete, structural stuff. Require paper ballots and count them by hand, get rid of the Electoral College, slap term limits on Congress, and get private money out of politics. I mean, yeah, it's radical, for sure, but it's all policy-based. Okay, now contrast that with this quote from the supporter blog. For them, the problem wasn't just bad policy. Oh no, it was a deep, historical conspiracy that in their minds all started on one day, the day JFK was assassinated. And this wasn't just some fringe idea on the blog either. Here's a picture of Ventura himself right at the site of the JFK assassination. Both he and his followers shared this core belief that the official story was a complete lie, and that one event was the moment the country really started to go downhill. And once you start there, the worldview on the blog just spirals out. They started questioning everything. The official stories of Pearl Harbor and 9/11? Suspect. That military exercise back in 2015 called Jade Helm, they saw it as a huge threat. It even got to the point where there was this bizarre theory about a listeria outbreak at an ice cream company because its trucks were supposedly seen in a military convoy. I mean, they saw hidden forces and conspiracies absolutely everywhere. But as 2015 moved along, it started to become pretty clear that a Jesse Ventura 2016 run just wasn't in the cards. And that's when the whole movement, and that blog at the center of it, took one last, really surprising turn. In a single post, the guy running the blog basically pulled the plug on the whole Ventura for president thing. And then he gave his followers a new piece of advice. He told them to back Donald Trump. And their reasoning for this is so revealing. It shows that for them, it was never really about the specific policies. It was about finding a strongman, an outsider who had the guts to just tear the whole system down. When it was clear Ventura wasn't running, they saw that exact same fighting spirit in Trump. He was the new guy who they thought would finally crack the whip on the criminals and the corrupt establishment. When you look back, this small, almost forgotten movement from 2015, it was like a perfect preview of the political earthquake that was about to hit. It really shows that for a certain type of voter, the specific policies are way less important than the persona. It's all about the fighter. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, right? What is it about this idea, this archetype of the ultimate outsider, that has such a powerful and lasting grip on American politics?